Something just changed, not in the way weather people talk about systems evolving or patterns shifting or conditions becoming favorable. Something changed in the way that only happens when the atmosphere decides it has been patient long enough and begins to show you, with real force, exactly what it is capable of. What unfolded across the United States this week was not a rough patch of spring weather. It was not a bad week of storms in the Midwest. It was the arrival of something that meteorologists who study severe weather for a living are now describing openly as one of the most alarming geographic shifts in severe weather history. And the week is not over. In fact, the worst is still to come. Right now, today, as you watch, the atmosphere is loading for what forecasters are calling one of the most concerning extended range signals of the entire 2026 season. And most people do not yet understand what that means or why it matters so much. Start with a number. Through April 22nd, 2026, the state of Illinois has recorded 101 confirmed tornadoes. Not for the full year, not for the past 2 years. For the first 4 months of 2026 alone. The annual average number of tornadoes in Illinois, the figure meteorologists use as their baseline for what a typical year looks like in that state, is 54. Illinois had nearly doubled its annual average before May even arrived. And the tornadoes in Illinois were not isolated events. They were part of a statewide, season-long pattern of relentless, severe weather that has turned the traditional understanding of where tornadoes happen in America completely upside down. For generations, when Americans pictured tornado country, they pictured Texas. They pictured Oklahoma. They pictured the flat, wide-open prairies of Kansas, where supercell thunderstorms can be seen from 50 miles away. And storm chasers have been racing dirt roads for decades. Those mental maps are now wrong. And the data of 2026 is the clearest proof yet that something fundamental has shifted. Here is what the Storm Prediction Center data is showing, and it should make every meteorologist in this country take a long, hard look at the assumptions baked into their seasonal forecasts. Illinois is not just leading the country in tornado reports this year. Illinois is leading every state in hail reports and high wind reports simultaneously. Through April 19th, Illinois had logged 80 tornado reports, 147 hail reports, and 245 high wind reports. First in the nation in all 3 categories. The runner-up for tornado reports was Mississippi with 43. Illinois had nearly twice as many. The Chicago NWS Forecast Office, which covers northern Illinois and northwest Indiana, had issued 61 tornado warning events through April 21st, more than any other weather forecast office in the entire country. The Minneapolis office had issued 49. Des Moines had issued 47. For context, those numbers are historically associated with offices in Oklahoma and Kansas, not with forecast zones that include major American cities where people commute to office buildings and send children to school. Tornado Alley has moved. It has moved east. And the 2026 spring season is the loudest possible confirmation of a trend that climate scientists and meteorologists have been documenting for years. Understand why this shift is happening, and you understand why 2026 feels different from every previous severe weather season most Americans have ever experienced. The classic setup for catastrophic tornado outbreaks requires 3 things: warm, moist air flowing north from the Gulf of Mexico, cold, dry air pressing east from the Rocky Mountain region, and a jet stream positioned overhead to create the violent wind shear that allows thunderstorms to begin rotating. For most of tornado history, that perfect intersection happened most reliably over the southern plains, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. But as the Gulf of Mexico has warmed, the moisture plume feeding severe weather systems has become deeper, more consistent, and more capable of driving far enough north and east to collide with cold air intrusions over states that historically sat at the edge of that danger zone. Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota. These states are now regularly sitting at the bullseye of an atmospheric setup that used to be reserved for areas hundreds of miles to their southwest. And in 2026, that shift has reached a scale that no one who studies the historical data can dismiss as noise. Now add what happened specifically this week, because this week delivered the most vivid demonstration of that shift imaginable. On April 17th, a major tornado outbreak roared across the upper Midwest and southern plains, confirming 75 tornadoes and leaving a trail of destruction through communities that are still being surveyed. An EF2 tornado hit Rochester, Minnesota, captured on city traffic cameras. The town of Lena, Illinois, was struck by an EF2 that tore the roofs off homes and caused structural damage to both the elementary school and the high school, with students inside both buildings at the time. A low-end EF3 in Buffalo County, Wisconsin, leveled homes, stripping exterior walls and leaving structures that looked as though they had been peeled open from above. The NWS office in La Crosse, Wisconsin, issued 26 tornado warnings in a single day, the most since that office opened in 1995. And even as survey teams were still working through the damage from April 17th, the atmosphere was already reloading, not pausing, not resting, reloading. Here's the detail that gets lost when people count tornadoes and move on. The week of April 14th through 20th deposited 3 to 5 inches of rain across the upper Midwest, across Chicago, Green Bay, Wausau, Lansing, and Detroit, on top of ground that was already saturated from weeks of prior rainfall and snowmelt from the March blizzard that dropped more than 4 feet of snow across parts of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. The Wolf River in Wisconsin rose to nearly a foot above its record flood stage. The village of Shiocton, Wisconsin, reported that a majority of its streets were impassable and ordered evacuations. Waupaca County evacuated residents downstream of the Big Falls Dam. In Rock County, Wisconsin, floodwaters caused a train derailment, sending grain cars off the tracks. More than 20 river locations across Michigan and Wisconsin reached major or record flood stages simultaneously. Power was knocked out for more than 50,000 homes and businesses across Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma in the hours after the April 17th storms. The tornado outbreak and the flood disaster were not two separate events. They were the same event, delivered by the same system, multiplying each other's consequences in exactly the way that compound disasters always do. The tornadoes filled the headlines. The flooding filled the basements and the roads and the rivers. Both were devastating. Both were driven by the same historically anomalous atmospheric pattern. Now here is where this week takes a turn that should capture your complete attention, because what already happened is not the story. What is coming is the story. The Storm Prediction Center issued its extended range outlook on April 22nd, and what it revealed about the days immediately ahead is described by meteorologists in terms that veteran forecasters reserve for setups they consider genuinely dangerous. For this Saturday and Sunday, April 25th and 26th, a classic Great Plains severe weather outbreak is taking shape across Kansas, Oklahoma, North Texas, and western Arkansas. The engine driving it is a strengthening low-pressure system developing in the lee of the Colorado Rockies, a process called lee cyclogenesis, pulling a deep plume of warm, humid Gulf moisture northward directly into a sharpening dry line. The atmosphere is being loaded with instability values between 2,000 and 3,000 joules per kilogram. Those numbers represent the amount of energy available to fuel thunderstorms. To translate that into plain terms, 2,000 joules per kilogram is a significant severe weather day. 3,000 joules per kilogram is the level at which professional storm chasers drive hundreds of miles to put themselves in position. Forecasters are warning of baseball-sized or larger hail, straight-line winds exceeding 70 miles per hour, and a few strong EF2 or greater tornadoes across that corridor this weekend. But Saturday and Sunday are not the headline. Monday, April 27th is the headline. And what forecasters are saying about Monday is being described as one of the most alarming extended range signals of the entire 2026 season. The Storm Prediction Center has already issued a formal slight risk, level 2 of 5, for a massive corridor stretching from the Mississippi Delta through Memphis, Nashville, and Birmingham, eastward through Huntsville, Gadsden, and down through Jackson, Mississippi, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And forecasters are explicitly warning that this is a higher ceiling event, meaning the models are showing a realistic possibility that Monday's setup escalates well beyond a slight risk as the weekend system evolves and the atmosphere replenishes its moisture and instability. Multiple independent data sources are converging on a significant tornado signal for Memphis and the surrounding Mississippi Valley on Monday. The tornado probability values are already flagging at what meteorologists describe as high threat levels, despite the event still being 4 days away. In severe weather forecasting, getting a strong, consistent signal from multiple atmospheric models 4 to 5 days in advance is not common. When it happens, forecasters pay attention. When it persists across multiple model runs, as this signal has, they issue formal outlooks days early, and they use words like alarming. Those words have been used about Monday. They have not been used casually. This is the pattern that makes 2026 so dangerous and so different. It is not one outbreak and then a break. It is outbreak layered upon outbreak, each one moving into ground that the previous one left compromised. The rivers across the southern Mississippi Valley are already running high from weeks of upstream flooding in the Midwest. The ground across Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi is entering this next sequence already carrying the moisture signature of a wet spring. When Monday's system arrives and begins producing heavy rainfall on top of already elevated rivers and saturated soil, the flooding threat compounds, at a rate that rainfall totals alone do not capture. An inch of rain on dry ground produces minor runoff. An inch of rain on ground already at saturation capacity produces flash flooding. 2 inches of rain on rivers already at flood stage produces catastrophic, community-destroying inundation. The atmosphere does not care that communities just recovered from the last event. It delivers the next one on whatever schedule the physics dictates. And beneath all of this, There's a second story running parallel to the storms themselves, one that deserves the same level of urgency and receives only a fraction of the attention. The warning system protecting Americans from these storms is under strain that has no recent historical precedent. Through April 21st, the National Weather Service had issued 838 tornado warning events across 68 forecast offices nationwide, a pace that is running historically high for this point in the season. The meteorologists staffing those offices are working at the outer edge of sustainable capacity. The Goodland, Kansas NWS office, which covers some of the most tornado-active land in the country, was forced to restructure its entire shift schedule this spring to prevent staff from burning out before the season's most dangerous weeks arrive. The office had previously been forced to halt overnight forecasting entirely due to staffing shortages, a situation that, if it recurs during a nighttime tornado outbreak, could have consequences that are impossible to overstate. Multiple NWS offices across the Great Plains reported failing to conduct standard morning weather balloon launches on April 13th, the day a tornado outbreak struck Kansas communities with little advance warning. A sitting congresswoman formally demanded answers about whether those missed launches contributed to delayed tornado watches. Outside, meteorologists studying the balloon data said plainly, they are still missing data at the normal times, and the problem has not been solved. Weather balloons are not relics of old science kept around for tradition. They are irreplaceable. Twice a day, at more than 100 sites across the country, they take direct measurements of temperature, humidity, pressure, and wind from the surface all the way to the edge of the stratosphere. That vertical profile of the atmosphere feeds directly into the computer models that generate tornado watches 6 to 12 hours before the first storm fires. When a launch is delayed or skipped, the models run on incomplete data. The snapshot of the atmosphere they construct has gaps in it. And in the volatile atmospheric conditions of late April 2026, gaps in the atmospheric snapshot are not a minor technical inconvenience. They are the difference between a tornado watch being issued at 10 in the morning and communities having 6 hours to prepare versus a watch being issued at 4 in the afternoon when supercells are already on. And people have 30 minutes. 5 former directors of the National Weather Service signed a joint letter making exactly this point, warning that the agency had entered the most dangerous period of the severe weather season, operating below the staffing levels required to guarantee the warning performance Americans have come to depend on and build their emergency planning around. What makes this moment genuinely unprecedented and genuinely dangerous is the convergence of 3 things happening simultaneously that have never happened together before at this scale. First, the geographic shift of severe weather into the upper Midwest and toward densely populated corridors that lack the tornado culture, shelter infrastructure, and institutional preparation of traditional tornado alley. When a tornado hits rural Oklahoma, people go to their storm shelters. When a tornado hits suburban Chicago or a mid-sized Illinois town, the shelter compliance rate is lower, the building stock was not designed with tornado resilience in mind, and the institutional memory of how to respond is thinner. Second, an atmospheric pattern that is delivering outbreaks in rapid succession without the recovery periods that emergency managers and meteorologists have historically counted on between major events. Third, a warning. Infrastructure, under demonstrated capacity pressure at the exact moment the demand on it is running at record levels. These 3 things do not merely add up to a difficult, severe weather season. They multiply into something that the historical playbook for managing severe weather risk was not written to handle. The data that is accumulated through April 22nd, 2026 is not ambiguous. It is not subject to interpretation. Illinois has surpassed 100 tornadoes for the 4th year in a row. The Chicago NWS office has issued more tornado warnings through mid-April than any forecast office in the country, more than offices in Oklahoma and Kansas. The national tornado warning count through April 21st stands at 838 events, a total that reflects an atmosphere that has been firing organized severe weather systems on a near-daily basis since early spring. And right now, today, the Storm Prediction Center's extended range. Guidance is showing an 80 to 90% probability of severe weather parameters converging across the southern plains this Sunday, with that energy then pivoting east toward Memphis, Nashville, and Birmingham on Monday, in what multiple independent forecast sources are describing as a high-ceiling severe weather event. This is not speculation. This is what the models are showing. This is what the forecasters are saying. This is what the physics of a historically warm, historically moist, historically unstable atmosphere produces when it interacts with the late April jet stream configuration that has, for generations, produced the most dangerous tornado outbreaks in American history. The serious turn that this week's storms have taken is not a metaphor. It is a measurable, documented, forecasted reality. The outbreak that already happened left 75 tornadoes, flooded dozens of rivers to record levels, damaged schools while children sat inside them, and sent survey teams into Wisconsin and Minnesota communities that are still being cataloged. The outbreak that is Arriving this weekend over the southern plains carries baseball-sized hail and EF2 potential, and the system that follows on Monday is being flagged 4 days out with the kind of atmospheric signal that professional forecasters do not dismiss. The window between now and Monday is not a period of safety. It is a period of preparation. The atmosphere has been showing you what 2026 is this entire spring. The question is whether the people in the path of what is coming next have been paying attention. Because the storms are not asking for your attention. They are not asking for anything. They are arriving on the schedule that physics has set, into communities that are already carrying the damage of what came before, watched over, by a warning system that is doing everything it can with the resources it has. The serious turn is already here. What happens next is up to you.